Good afternoon. Today is Friday, March 12th, 2010, and my name is Gail G. Trell, and it is my pleasure to interview today Eleanor Leferman at her home in Stamford on Strawberry Hill Avenue as part of the Oral History Archive of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. And I'm also doing the videography today, so let's hope it works. And I've been looking forward to this because it's so enjoyable to interview. So let's find out, Eleanor. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
Okay, my mother was born in London, and she came to the United States in 1901. She was 6 years old. My father was born in Manhattan in 1889, and he had all his schooling in New York. My mother, when she and her parents first came to the United States, they moved to Schuylerville, New York, which is upstate New York. And my grandfather, because they came from England, they spoke perfect English and whatever, got a job as a Prudential insurance agent. Mm-hmm. And sometime after that, it was only a couple of years, I know, they moved to Manhattan. My grandfather went to one of the schools that teach you pattern making and design, and that's what he took up. And then went into business and manufactured ladies' dresses. Great. My father, on the other hand, his parents were quite poor, and in those days when you became 16 years old, you went to work. And they had a relative, I guess, that was in ladies' lingerie business, who gave him a job and taught him the business. Mm-hmm. And so he went from there until he was manager of a plant of several hundred people. Wow. And in 1925, there was a problem with the unions in New York City. And my father's boss was one of three brothers that owned this business, said to him, "You know, Henry, let's take a ride on Sunday. We've got to find another place to go." And so they drove. They first stopped in Stamford, and the building that was to become American Cyanamid was really built by the Royal Society people, which made thread. And they had just gone bankrupt. And so they thought about using one floor of that building, but they found out that there were no other needle trade companies in Stamford, so they couldn't get help. They'd have to train them on electric sewing machines. Mm-hmm. So they went to Bridgeport, and they found there were three companies there that made corsets. My father's perfect. And so they bought a building, and that's how I grew up in Bridgeport.
Okay, for the record, let's mention their names, so we have their names recorded.
Oh, it was Mitchell Brothers.
Yeah, but also
my
father's name?
My father's name was Henry and Weil, and my mother was Marion Gottlieb Weil. Uh-huh. And
did she do anything? Did she have a career?
No, my mother could have had a career. My mother was an accomplished pianist. And when she was in her second year of high school, my grandfather wanted her to quit high school, and it meant practicing 8 hours a day, and have that as her profession. And my mother was tired then of being the pianist at all the parties. She never got to dance, and she said no, she didn't want that. And so he said to her, "Okay, go to business school." So she left high school in the middle and went to business school, and that's how she met my dad. She worked in the office, and he ran the factory. And they married in 1917 in June, and I was born in September 1918.
Okay.
And their honeymoon was the overnight boat up the Hudson River.
Love it.
My mother said he spent the night with the captain.
Lovely.
So that's okay. Anyway, so we came to Bridgeport, and I went to Elias Howe Grammar School, which was right across the street from where we lived on Clinton Avenue. And then I went to Junior College of Connecticut, which is now the University of Bridgeport, for 2 years. And then I transferred to UConn. I was accepted at Barnard, and that was the same year my brother graduated from, that was as a junior, my brother graduated from high school, and he was accepted at MIT. It was also the Depression. And they couldn't afford to send us, even though he had part scholarship, to both those schools. And so they gave us a choice of going to the University of Connecticut. And the two of us could go for the price of one.
Okay, that's
For
good.
less than the price of one. And so that's what we did. And there was the first time that I found out that Jews weren't always welcome.
That's part of our conversation
realize
should
that.
include that. Now you had, before we go on, you had two brothers, correct?
Yes, I did.
So you mentioned one.
Well, because the other one was a baby at the time. My younger, one brother was just 22 months younger than I. The other brother was 14 years younger than I. It was a big space in between. And so that my brother Marty, who, I was very close to both my brothers. And so one was just right behind me in school. And the other one was, he was still a little boy when I got married.
Sure.
Anyway, to get on to when I went to UConn, my roommate was a gal from Springfield, Massachusetts. And the first thing she said to me was, "What church do you go to?" I said, "I don't go to church. I go to synagogue. I'm Jewish." The mouth went open. She says, "Jewish." The very next day she asked for a new roommate.
Wow.
The funny part of it is that her roommate became very good friends with us. And the rest of us, we were a couple of us were Jewish, a couple weren't. And because one of the girls had gone to, in fact, two of the girls up there that I was friends with had gone to junior college with me. One was Jewish, one wasn't. And so the gal that had been my roommate and her roommate was very good friends with all of us. So she had to have all her meals with us. She wasn't happy. It was like, we had horns in our heads, but
Yeah. How did it make you feel when she wanted to find another roommate?
like dirt. It was just,
Yeah.
and the funny part was, she didn't come from such a hotsy-totsy family. Her brother lived on a farm with his supposed to be housekeeper, but she was his girlfriend, whatever, they weren't married. Her father was chief of the fire department in Springfield, and she would go home every weekend because it was very close. But that was the first time I came, because up until then, we lived in the west end of Bridgeport for many years. Then we moved up to the north end. And there were always Jewish people around us. And those that weren't were friends of ours. And I never, had come into anything like that. The other thing that later on when I grew up, during the war, the company my father managed had to go out of business because they needed their building, which is a one-story building with windows all around, for Sikorsky to have a drafting building. And so his bosses at that point were senior citizens and decided they've had it, they're going to go out of business. And so my father took a job in North Carolina making T-shirts for the Army, the Navy, and the Marines. And there are a couple of things that happened down there. Before he went down, because the company he worked for were owned by a Jewish man, actually he was a philanthropist, and his name was Rogerson. And they came from Newark. There were buildings there that have I. Rogerson on them. He also wanted his son to go to Yale, so he bought a chair at the University of Yale, whatever. But a very nice man. And before my father went to North Carolina, he said to him, Henry, you have a very heavy beard. Make sure you shave every day. My father says, I always shave every day. And poor Marty, who was 10 years old when my younger brother, when they moved down there, was made fun of. First of all, he grew up in Connecticut, but he did have some of my father's inflections, which were New Yorkese. And there was one kid that called him that Yankee Jew.
Wow.
And and his father worked for my dad. And somebody got a hold of his father that knew that and told his father. And he said, you know, Henry Weil will never do anything to you because of your son, but I suggest you have your son change his
Attitude.
And so then it was a lot easier for my kid brother.
Okay.
Another thing, having been down south at the time when there was still, segregation.
Right.
And I could never understand when we went to the railroad station where white went in one door and black went in the other door and whatever. And there came one summer when I had been down there all summer with the two children. And my mother and father were coming back up north for a visit, and we were all going to drive. And my mother's housekeeper, who was black, Helen, lovely, lovely lady, she was like a member of the family, said, Mrs. Weil, could I hitch, you think there's room for me to hitch a ride to go up to New York? She said, I have cousins, I haven't seen them in a long time. Mother said, sure. She said, of course, Helen. And the morning we were leaving, Helen arrives at the door with a pillow and a blanket. My mother said, Helen, what have you got a pillow and a blanket for? She said, well, I know you're not going to go drive through the night. You're going to stay at a motel. She says, I can't stay at the motel with you. And she says, I'm afraid to stay at a black motel. She says, I'll sleep in the car. You'll lock the car. My mother said, you will not. And so she said, well, what'll we do? My mother said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And so, of course, came around 4 o'clock that afternoon. My mother said to my father, okay, Henry, find a place to stop. And so we came to a very nice-looking motel, and Dad stopped. And he went to get out. My mother says to me, you go with your father, and you make sure that Helen sleeps with us. So we went up to the counter, and I said, we need 2 double rooms. 2 rooms adjoining with double beds. I said, my husband and I will sleep in one, my mother and father in the other in one room. I said, and we have our black nurse with us. I said, she will sleep with my children. So they looked at me. Okay, but you can't eat in the dining room. I said, well, that's okay. None of us were going to eat in your dining room. We have a refrigerator with food with us. And that's what we did.
Interesting.
And so, those are...
Can you remember what year that was? Like,
yes,
how old were the...
I can tell you within a year.
Yeah.
David was born, my younger son was born in 1949. And my mother had a stroke in 1950 in February. And it was that summer.
Okay.
Because it was just... No, excuse me. It was 51, the summer after, because she was okay then, but she had a slight limp.
Okay, so it was in the 50s. Okay, that's a good story to know, that it affected your life. I mean...
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So, okay. So we talked about your father and your mother and some of where you lived. So, and you talked a little bit about your schooling.
Okay. I was a math and science major, mostly. I never finished college. At I was very homesick for home. I finished that 1 year up at UConn. My brother graduated from UConn. And as my younger son graduated from UConn, and Norman got his master's degree at UConn. My father wasn't ready for me to go out in the world to work. So he had me go to business school after 3 years of college. So I went about a year and a half. I took up stenography and bookkeeping, and then he wanted me to go to Pace. And I said, at that point I was 21. I said, you know what? I've had enough schooling. And so he got me a job in an office of an attorney and an accountant in Bridgeport. He knew both of them. They also needed somebody they could trust because the attorney took care of property for his clients, and the rents all came into that office. And so that was it. And I was in charge of the office. I had 2 gals that worked for me. When it came to typing, they did everything but the wills because the attorney didn't want anybody doing the wills but me.
Okay.
And also, I typed a lot of tax returns. And I have a funny story about one of the tax returns.
What company? What was the name of the company? What was the law firm?
It was Rosenblum. Harry Rosenblum was the attorney, and they worked separately. They just shared offices. And Nishbal, I forgot what his first name was the CPA.
Okay.
And the one funny story was this one day, Harry, the attorney, was doing a tax return for clients, and he gave it to me to type. And as I'm typing it, I see there was a huge error, a mathematical error. Math wasn't his good. So I pick up my phone and I call him up, and he comes out and he says, "What's wrong?" I said, "Harry, there's a mistake on this." So he looks at it, I show it to him, he says, "Oh my God, you're right." He says, "Okay, fix it." And so I did, and I typed it, and then I told him it was ready, and he takes it in, he shows the client, and he told him he made a mistake, and I found it. Well, the husband of the couple said to him, "I gotta go out, I'll be right back." He wanted to get a gift for me. And he bought me a box of candy. But in the box of candy was a $10 gold piece.
Whoa.
Now, this was 1940 and 1941. So when a $10 gold piece was a lot, since all I earned was $18 a week.
That's interesting, yes.
In running this whole office.
And did you work 9 to 5?
Oh, of course, on Saturday from 9 to 12.
Oh, and $18?
On $18 a week.
Wow.
Well, my first job in Stanford, when I went to work for Hartford Provision, and I forgot exactly what it was a week that they promised me. But it came out to be an odd amount. And I should have been getting, oh, I know. And the gal that was in charge of the payroll at that time changed it. So came out to be $69 and change because that was an even amount. In other words, it wasn't 23 cents an hour or whatever. I don't know how much an hour it was. I forgot. And I remember once when I went into Ralph for a raise, and
Ralph
Ralph Lotstein, and we were talking, And I said to him, well, you know, when I first started here, and that was a number of years before, I said, Irene cut it back by, I don't know whether it was 5 cents an hour or whatever. So he says, well, you know, because she needed it to be an even amount. I says, I know, but you know how many years I've been here? And that 5 cents an hour, I'm still not getting it? I said, it comes to a lot of money. I had to figure it out to the penny.
Right. I'm going. Okay, Eleanor, I'm going to get back to how you met your husband.
Oh. As I said, my brother George went to UConn, and the year after I came home, Tau Epsilon Phi got a house. Up until then, they were in the dorm. And my brother was, whatever, he was president or whatever it is they call whatever. And George took care of things very lackadaisically. So I ended up doing a lot of his things. They needed to buy furniture. And one night, Lenny Prashansky, who lived here in Stamford, called up. In fact, it was a Saturday, early evening. He wanted to know when the furniture was being delivered for the house up at school. And he asked if George was home, and I said, no. He said, well, Eleanor, do you know anything about it? I said, yeah, I've been writing all the letters for him and making the telephone calls. And I gave him the information that he wanted. He thanked me and said goodbye. And I said, and 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. And Lenny said, Eleanor, I'm up here in Bridgeport. I have a date, but my friend with me doesn't have a date. Would you go out with him? I said, well, here I had to stop and think, oh my God, my mother, my father will go out of their minds. But if I say no, the whole fraternity will think I'm queer. And so I said, sure. And of course, when I got off the phone, my mother said, what? You don't know? Anyway, they gave me a half hour to get dressed. And when I came downstairs, they were there already, and Lenny Prashansky, who knew my parents, had introduced my date, and they were all conversing. And I said, as I came down the stairs, Lenny said to me, and this is Irv, you're stuck with him. And that was it, because every Wednesday and Saturday, he would take the train, then take the bus, because we lived way up in northern Bridgeport. And you'd see him walking down the block. And that's how we met, and that was...
Love at first sight. Yes,
yeah. And you wanted to know about my Jewish upbringing. We never had a kosher home. Number one, my father, who was born in New York City, came from a family that were here since 1845. Mm-hmm. And so even when he and my mother got married, the rabbi that married them used a very orthodox ceremony. My mother said he figured out if he wasn't Jewish, he was going to make him Jewish. But my father was Jewish. It was just that they'd been here for so many years. His mother came as a very young girl, but his father came as an infant in 1845. And so that was why. Mm-hmm. My grandmother lived with us off and on over the years, my mother's mother, and she kept certain things. We kept certain things in the house because of her. My mother's idea of getting ready for Passover was for stripping the pantry, good, scrubbing it down, washing all the dishes, and saying, I now make you Passover.
Good, that's okay. So did you remember having the holidays at home?
Oh, yes. Not only we had holidays, but my mother's brothers and their wives came. My father's, at that point, my my father's parents were gone, but he had an aunt that he was devoted to, whose children, did nothing for the holidays. And so she came up from New York. She lived on Brook Avenue in the Bronx, and she loved it. And we kept all the holidays, and as best we could. And as I said, my brother George was bar mitzvahed. I never had any religious training. And my younger brother, Marty, wasn't bar mitzvahed because they lived in North Carolina, and my mother didn't drive. And the nearest synagogue that could train him was in Charlotte, which was 45 miles away. And so he learned just by whatever was happening in the house. And I can tell you a funny story too about the Jews in North Carolina. There were, I think, 4 families when my parents moved down there. And this one family, there were 2 sisters, and they had been here from before the Revolutionary War. Not the sisters, their parents. They had the oldest herbarium in the world, and one of the largest. That's how they grew up. At this point, it wasn't being used anymore. One sister went to Syracuse University and met a Brooklyn young man and brought him back to North Carolina. The other sister wasn't married. She had gone to a girls' college, I forgot which one. But they all lived together in this huge house that was built way before the Civil War. And anyway, they learned to cook Jewish dishes from the one's husband that came from Brooklyn. They improvised a bit. And my mother's talking to them one day, says, "How do you make chopped liver?" She says, "Well, I take butter and I saute onions and then I saute the liver." They didn't know any different.
Right.
But those are some of the funny stories.
Right. That's great. So now, getting back to Irv, and you've met,
and we got married at the Tree of Life Temple on Eastern Boulevard, I think, in Brooklyn.
Oh.
And
what got you to Brooklyn?
My parents lived there for 1 year, and I lived there for 9 months. My father took a job in New York City when the plant closed in Bridgeport.
I see.
And it didn't work out, and then he got the job in North Carolina. And so that I already knew Irv at that time. And so that's how I was married in Brooklyn. And we had our honeymoon in the Hotel Pennsylvania in Manhattan because it was during the war. And
What year was it? What's the date?
1943, for February 7th, 1943. And we came back to Stamford. We lived a couple of months with his parents on Glenbrook Road. And then we took an apartment. We found one at 22 Glenbrook Road. And we lived there for 9 years. Both boys were born there. And they were born at St. Joe's. And then from there, we moved to Strawberry Hill, to Hampshire House, where we bought that before it was built. We went in with the people when it wasn't even a hole in the ground. We put up my parents knew about it, and they said, "You know what? You have to start someplace." And they gave us the $2,000 that you needed to put up to buy that. And so there again, we lived, we lived there from 53 to 1960 something. I can't, probably about 9 or 10 years too. I can't remember exactly. Because Norman started college when we were still on Strawberry Hill. We bought a house on Weedle Avenue because that was when my father died. And my mother came to live with us.
Okay.
And actually, my brother got married at the same time, my kid brother, because they were living in the Hoyt Bedford apartments when they were new. And they had moved up from North Carolina because they were not well. Anyway, so that, and so we had the two boys,
And give us their names for the record.
Norman Bruce and David Saul. And they're 3 years and 3/4 apart. So they were 4 years apart in school, which made it very nice because one was in college, the other was in high school. And they both married and had children. My younger son, his 3 kids are all adopted. They were married 9 years and finally gave up hope. Had they waited a couple more years, they probably might have been able to have, because other things came up.
Right.
But they went through hell, and when her gynecologist finally had started this, in vitro, whatever, or whatever.
Vitro?
They already had adopted one child, and she says, forget it, I'm not going through anything more. This is the way we'll go.
Great.
So I have, let's see, here in Stamford, I have 3 grandchildren from Norman and Nancy. I have Lori, Randy, and Mark. All 3 of them are married. Between them, they've given me 8 great-grands. And David my younger son, has the 3 children. One has just graduated from high school, one is still in college, and one just got his master's degree and is working for Lockheed as an electrical engineer.
Great. Great story, great family, and they're nearby enough for you to see them?
Yeah. Actually, Norman is now living in Massachusetts, and he has a place in Florida, but I see them all the time. In fact, he's coming up to do his taxes, and I'm going back to Florida with him, and I'll stay there through the Passover.
Great.
And then we'll all drive back. They'll drop me here, and then they'll go up to Massachusetts.
Okay.
And usually, sometime when I'm going to Florida, or coming back, I stop off in Richmond to see David and Maria. But they're going to move a little closer. I think they're going to move outside of Baltimore now. And
That'll be good.
Michael, their oldest, went through school in Massachusetts. Stephen is up in outside of Rochester, New York at school. And I think Amanda, when she graduates from high school, hopes to go up in that direction to college too.
Right. Great family history in here. When you were bringing up your boys and you were in Stamford, you chose to live in Stamford, what was their Jewish upbringing?
Okay. My mother-in-law and father-in-law belonged to a Good Shalom. And for many, many years, that's where we went. Both boys were bar mitzvahed there.
Okay.
And sometime after that, I started going to Bethel with my sister-in-law Marion, because she had switched.
Marion.
Tunic. And then we joined, and the kids all went there. My Norman and Nancy, and then all 3 of my grandchildren were bar and bat mitzvah from Bethel. And now some of them still go and some of them don't. Laurie, the oldest one, works at Temple Shalom, whatever, in Greenwich, and so they go there. Randy and Craig never liked the organ at Bethel, and I guess they go to
the Chabad.
the Havrah. Mark and Susan, I think, still go to Bethel, as far as I know, and I still belong to Bethel.
Okay, good.
I don't go there because I go to Massachusetts to be with Norman for the holidays.
Okay.
So while I still have my membership at Bethel, and when they send me the notice of my husband's, the anniversary,
Yes.
then I go to services.
Okay. I
I drag Jen and Murph with me. Sure. Otherwise, I'm afraid I go to Temple Sinai more than I go to Temple Bethel, because the Winegrads are good friends, and I don't know if you know, but I know Murph longer than Jen knows him.
Probably.
Well, he and my brother George, fraternity brothers.
Okay.
So I know him from college.
Okay.
Way
So
back.
you're an equal opportunity temple goer,
Yeah.
and you've done them all.
That's right.
Well, that's wonderful. So if we can go back a little bit to tell Irv's background, because he has a big Stanford
Yeah.
history.
They lived.
He was born in
He
Stanford.
was born here.
He was born in Stanford.
I'm trying to think. You know, down by the firehouse on Main Street there. All of a sudden, I'm forgetting names of streets.
Was he on Lafayette Street?
No. He- what's this? When you come down here, okay. All of a sudden, I forgot the name of the street. I should know it like the back of my hand. When you get down to the corner, where Hoyt Street and Strawberry Lanes, Hoyt Prospect, Strawberry Hill. What's the one that goes?
Grove.
Grove. Okay. Now, if you go straight down Grove Street to where it gets to Main Street, okay. Years ago, there's a statue there and whatever. I guess there was a park there years ago. And they lived on the street, Irv and his parents lived on this street that went this way, which is no longer there. And they had a store there.
Do you remember the name of the store and what it kind
It
of
was a
store?
hardware store.
Hardware store.
And Irv had an older brother, David, who was about, I think, 2.5, 3 years older than him. And the kids all ran across the street, he and his friends, and Irv was following them. And he was hit by a car right there. And he was in the Stanford Hospital for 6 months. During that time, he came down with diphtheria, scarlet fever. I guess he was unconscious for 21 days. But he survived it. In fact, he said that nobody ever wanted to tell him about it. So one day he got out of school, sneaked out. It's when he was in high school, and went to the library, and he got the back newspapers, and he read about it, because there was, for months, there was a little thing on the front page, a little box that told how he was doing.
Right.
And the man that hit him was a Chevrolet salesman. And of course, it wasn't his fault, because he had, run out after the kids. Anyway, he was so upset about it for years. And one year, sometime after I was married, in fact, Norman was an infant in a carriage. And I used to go shopping with my mother-in-law all the time. I mean, it was nothing. We lived on Glenbrook Road. She lived on Lafayette Street. And she'd meet me at the corner. We'd walk down to Pacific Street, to the butcher and whatever. And don't we meet this man on the street? And she recognized him, and he her. And she says, I want you to meet Irving's wife, and this is his baby. So the man was so thrilled.
Right.
So
Yes. Good story.
that was...
Did Irv's family have affiliation anywhere? Did they
Yes, with the Goodish Law.
go to show?
Yeah.
Okay.
They belonged there before it was in that building. Before, I guess it was on Brook Street or whatever. Or whether it was the same...
It was on Grove.
But it was before that building was built on Grove Street.
Okay. All right. I don't remember. That's good for history. So now, how did you observe the holidays in your household? Did you do the
Well, when
cooking and...
Well, the whole thing was that my mother-in-law made the holidays, and we all went.
Sure.
And my sister-in-law did things, I did things. later years, when it got to be a bit for my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law married too, and had a big house. And so we did it there. I would come over and help her cook, and she had help, and so we always did it together. It was never, anything like that until my in-laws died, and then we started having our own. And I guess it wasn't until I lived on Weed Hill Avenue, or maybe it was after my parents moved up from North Carolina. It was probably even when I lived on Strawberry Hill at Hampshire House that I started having the holidays. And no, but I always kept them. I mean, as far as Passover, but for the big dinners and what have you, it wasn't until later years that I started doing it. And then when Norman and Nancy were first married, Jen and I took turns. And when it came to Passover, she had the first night, I had the second night, but we were together both nights.
Right.
And when it came to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I always made breakfast, and she made Rosh Hashanah.
Good family planning.
Yes, it was.
So now, getting into thinking about the work that you might have done with Jewish organizations.
Oh, that was okay. I was a member for many years of National Council, and I was donor chairman. I was rummage chairman. One year they wanted me to be president. As I said, I was very active in raising money and what have you, and being on the board. And one day they came to me and said, "We want you to be the next president," because I had been a vice president. And they said, "And you get a free trip to California, because the meeting this year is in California, the national meeting. And you can take your husband with you and just pay for his airfare." Well, let's face it, we didn't have the kind of money in those days for me to pay for his airfare to begin with. Secondly, I had nobody to take care of the two kids and send them off to school. And so I said to him, "You know what? I like doing what I'm doing." I said, "I'll give you a good name." And, I forgot what her first name was.
Yeah.
Harriet.
Oh.
Harriet Sherman. And so she became president. And I still worked for council until it got to be that it took up a lot of my evenings when my kids should be doing their homework, or they needed rides to the Jewish Center and whatever for scouts. And so but I had been very active with them. In those days, we mended toys for the fire department. I typed. We had a huge typewriter with large type, where we typed books for people that had low eyesight, and that sort of thing.
Right.
And I did that for many years.
Yeah. Community service.
That's right.
Absolutely. Are there any other affiliations that you had? Hadassah?
Oh, well, okay. With the Cubs, I was a den mother for a number of years while my sons were Cub Scouts. I did that. I forgot all these things. It's a long time ago.
Right. Well, so you were going to tell me some stories of what it was like living in Stamford as a Jewish young woman and a Jewish couple.
Well, a lot of funny things. My mother had a kosher butcher in Bridgeport, and he had a young man working for him. And I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. And lo and behold, my mother-in-law takes me to this kosher butcher on Pacific Street, and I walk and I say, "Julius, I found you." Julius Platsky. He had, as a very young man growing up, he had worked for the kosher butcher in Bridgeport and learned his trade. And then he came to Stamford and opened up a kosher butcher on Pacific Street. And as I often say, in those days, there were less Jews in Stamford, and we supported 3 kosher butchers on Pacific Street. And now they can't get a kosher butcher. Mm. It's strange. And let's see. Oh, I can tell you a funny story. My husband was a great one for ice cream. And, you know, years ago, when it would be Yom Kippur, when they had Yisker, they would tell us to leave because we didn't have anybody that was dead. Right. So we'd go for a walk. Almost every year, he'd walk me into Star Confectionery, and I'd have the first lick, and I'd say, Irv, but it's Yom Kippur. Oh, God. And I'm on fasting. He says, that doesn't matter. You're not eating anything.
Oh, God.
He was a great one. Let's see. I'll tell you, well, this isn't Jewish, but I can remember the trolley tracks downtown before they covered them over. And one day we had borrowed we didn't have a car in those days. We borrowed my father-in-law's car. And that was when the A&P was down where Target now is.
Okay.
I don't know, can you remember that?
I don't.
It goes back. You were probably a kid. Anyway, we went down to go to the A&P downtown, and the car tires got stuck in the trolley tracks, which were frozen, and we had some job getting out. Remember when Woodside Village was brand new, and most of the young Jewish couples, that's where they lived. Because there's so many of our friends lived over there. And that was, there's a lot of other things I remember. When the circus was down down in Japan, or at the beginning there, and taking my sons, and I had a 53 Chevrolet, and it was probably about 2 years old, and I went to make a turn into the parking lot, and the car died right in the middle of the street, in all the traffic. I didn't know what to do. The battery died, and they had to push me, and then jump start me and whatever. Anyway, those are some of the things
that everybody would want to know.
Yeah.
That we've lived through all these traumas.
Oh,
go ahead.
One more thing, and I'm not quite sure of the year, but it was the big hurricane in the 50s. I know it was after 1953. It might have been around 55. It was a Saturday night. The kids were asleep, the lights went off, and we lit candles and played Scrabble, the two of us. And Irv said I could go for a cup of tea, but since we had an electric kitchen, so I said, I could make you a cup of tea. How? I said, we have some sterno from when we went camping. So I said, I have to make sure that it doesn't damage the counter. And so we went into the kitchen with a candle, we lit the sterno, and we suddenly see cars in front of Stamford High School coming and going. And I said to him, because in those days, if you didn't have the radio, you didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So we knew there was a storm, but didn't know it was a hurricane, and that there was a flooding. Anyway, we thought people were going to the symphony on a Saturday night, and I said to him, you know what? Some people are absolutely crazy. It wasn't until the next day that we found out that they were saving people in the flooded part of Stamford and bringing them to Stamford High. That's okay. Yeah, that's my last funny story.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We did touch on history in Stamford. We did touch on your rest of your life. And we love that you spent the time giving us this information. We will give you a DVD.
Oh,
that
thank
you will have of this, and we will put the another copy in the archives, so
Oh,
that
okay.
it keeps our our history alive.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Eleanor.
No, I enjoyed it. I
Good.
really did.
Good.